Real Country 1430 AM and 107.3 FM WRDN. Brian Winnekins from World Dairy Expo joining us right now. Mike North from Ever.Ag, and we are going to talk a little bit about the dairy markets, obviously being at World Dairy Expo. Thank you to our sponsors, including Alcivia Co-op, AMPI, Annabis Silo, BioVet, Bauer Seeds and Service, Animal Wellness Center of Buffalo Valley, and Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin. So we're going to more focus on the dairy market side, corn and the grains and the livestock. Boy, we could go on for 3 hours, but we're going to just focus on dairy since we're at World Dairy Expo. And Mike, it's been volatile, to say the least, in the Class 3 markets. One day it's limit up, the next day it's limit down, then it's here, there, and everywhere. Cheese goes up, Class 3 goes down, cheese goes down, Class 3 goes up. Is the market off its medication or what?
You have a scramble taking place right now as we produce enough cheese to meet all of the Q4 demand, and obviously that requires milk. And so different players are in this market on given days trying to jockey positions to get ahead of the trend. And what got us here ultimately was a short supply. We've had fewer cows in the barn for quite some time. 15 months of negative year-over-year milk production numbers. We've been battling bird flu. We're seeing, older cows having to try to carry the burden of milk production, which gives us less productivity. And now you throw into the mix, we've sent kids back to school, and we've taken milk back into a bottling program and away from the cheese vats. Couple that with college kids' addiction to pizza and sending them back to school, and a football season that really promotes pizza all the more. And all of this has come together to create this perfect storm. And the thing that I often remind people of is this time of the year, this is actually very normal. It feels a bit manic, but this is actually really normal. And it's what leads us often to those September, October, early November milk highs that we depend on to really, push forward great opportunities. And so as I look at this market, it definitely doesn't have this, step-by-step perfect rhythm to it. Cheese goes up, milk goes up, cheese goes down, milk goes down, because right now everybody's trying to get ahead of that next step of the seasonal curve and still satisfy this big demand that's coming at us really quickly, which is so key to the dairy complex. This is the magic moment for dairy. Q4 is always the brightest on the star on the horizon when we talk about dairy demand, and so it's an important time of the year. And so it's great to see buyers engaged. However, I think as we walk this thing forward a few more weeks, we'll really test their resolve. And ultimately, if seasonality has anything to say about it, we'll see them run to the sidelines. And I think even in the last couple of weeks, you've gotten a little bit of a foreshadowing of that as that barrel market fell from 260 and change back down to 215. And blocks went from 230 and change back down to 210. That happens. And it's what we like to call the falling knife. The moment the buyer steps away, all the buyers step away because nobody wants to catch the falling knife. And so you get moves like what we've just seen made very possible because no buyer wants to be the one that overpaid, because they're all competing with each other in this key demand window. So that's the market we're playing in. It's going to be, I think, well supported by supply side dynamics going through 2025. But that consumer plays a big role. The demand side, equally important to carry these type of prices because they are unprecedented. They represent the top 2% of milk price in all of history. So it's a big deal.
Meanwhile, butter went from 3 and some change, and it's dropped precipitously as well. Now, again, heading into the holidays, one would think that butter demand should be going up with all the baking and that sort of thing. Is butter kind of doing the same things cheese is?
In some regards, yes. And part of what has allowed butter to actually fall a little harder is that the supply side of butter is very different than the supply side of cheese. If you looked at the last cold storage report, we saw, cheese trying to hold itself together, and the drawdown wasn't normal relative to history. Normally we see it fall about 13% through that month of August. It fell 3%. It was the opposite in the month of July. It fell 13% when it was only supposed to fall 3%. Supplies year over year are smaller on cheese, but for butter, the reverse is true. We're seeing bigger year over year inventories as we go into this key demand window for butter. And that, I think, early on had some skepticism around it, and buyers were a little bit more animated, a little bit more willing to bid. And if you go back to the start of the year, we never really fell below 250. They basically said, we need it. Demand has been growing. We're going to keep bidding for it. I think we've gotten to that place where the buyers have what they need. There's plenty in inventory. They know if they run short, they can get a slack load here and there. But bottom line is, it's a more comfortable inventory picture than what we see in cheese right now as we battle into these final weeks of the big demand season.
Talking with Mike North from Ever.Ag about the dairy markets from World Dairy Expo. Let's talk about exports. They just haven't, it doesn't seem like they've been there, especially out east.
We have backed off over the course of the last 60 days for sure. But if you go back to the start of the year, exports are really what carried us into that, first move up in price. That big demand out of country was a little bit of a shocker when it started to show up in the reports in February. But you really can credit low prices last winter for that. If you recall, we saw a lot of $1.40 cheese, and that ultimately created some big opportunities for buyers.
Yeah, when it gets that low, guess what? Now you don't want to be the guy missing out after the knife had fallen.
That's a fact. And that's really what bolstered big exports for cheese. Powder prices have remained soft all year. The Mexican peso through the first half of the year up until that summer election was very strong, and Mexico was buying a lot of powder. Since then, their currency has fallen about 13% relative to our own, which has taken away some of their buying power. Ultimately, they've still been there, still a very solid buyer, great partner for us on the export side of things. Little bit of question around where their future is, especially as we close out the year. As you looked at butter isn't one we normally export anything significant on anyway. So the lack of exports there was no shocker. And so as we talk about exports right now, the last 60 days has definitely been more quiet. And it's been, especially on the cheese side, just a reflection of price. I love $1.40 cheese if you're selling it to me. I hate $2.50 cheese. And, that's just the simple market dynamic. It's, that Econ 101, law of supply and demand, less quantity demanded at higher prices. And so as we look at the road ahead, quite likely that will become more the norm as we walk into the end of the year with more elevated prices. But let's not lose sight of the fact that the world market has also risen to really tall levels. Europe is selling butter at $4 a pound right now. So, below $3, we start to become a really big value. Cheese prices are holding at levels, $2.40 and higher through Europe. So as we look at our $2.30, and even $2.15 now on the barrel, $2.10 block, we start to get really attractive again. As we walk this thing out, there's still that possibility that we could pick up some more sales just out of relativity. But we're also seeing a lot of normal seasonality that walks away from demand this time of the year and picks it back up as we come into the spring. So if prices go deep enough, there'll be, forward purchasing into that, spring delivery period. But expect a little bit of a softer export market as we finish out 24.
Talking with Mike North from Ever.Ag. And Mike, last year at this time, you and I were talking about the beef on dairy. And we had talked about it where you felt, and I'm sure you still do feel, dairy's really positioned for some opportunities for this because of the way we track our dairy, our cattle. And so we're already set to track cattle for the beef market, and so we can get higher premiums and that sort of thing. A lot of dairy farmers are looking at that. is that going to play into these lower cow numbers, this lower milk production down the road as the dairies start to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, milk's okay, but I can still do better. I can do even better with some of these beef cattle, dairy beef crosses. So why don't we do a little bit more of that and not worry as much about the milk production?
I would say it will, and it has. But central to that discussion, I think, for every dairyman is this question: what is my view of my role in the dairy space in the future? And I will tell you that the more heavy you breed towards beef, if we make 100% like the ultimate objective, that's a signal to me that that person likely isn't going to spend a lot of time in the dairy industry. Because think about the natural order of things. If I'm breeding only to beef, then every calf that hits the ground is black-hided beef and it leaves the farm. Where does my next heifer come from to replace the cow that's dropping that calf? Because she can only go through that cycle so many times before she fulfills her time here. And I have to have a replacement program one way or another. Am I willing to go back out and spend $3,300 on a springer to replace that cow? Not likely. Conversely, if I've got a guy that's not breeding to beef at all, and 0 is the perfect objective number, quite likely they have a growth mindset towards the future, and they're going to expand their dairy operation. And I think the balance for most lives somewhere in the middle. It's just a matter of to what side you swing. But generally speaking, it's all a game of replacement in the end, right? And it's what got us here was a small beef cow inventory, which led to fewer calves, which opened the door for more beef demand, which grew prices, which allowed us to breed our cows to beef. But we have to ask the question, what is our vision for the future? How do we want to be postured going forward? Because if I've got Junior coming home, and then another one of my kids, and then another one of my kids, and I intend to be in the space, I need more cows. I've got more mouths to feed at home. And so reality is I'm going to have more replacements so that I can build more barns and, scale my dairy operation. Whereas if I'm nearing retirement and I'm looking forward, I'm probably going to breed more beef. And that's really the setup right now. Is the view of the future will dictate the path we take here. And I think there's a lot of guys looking around right now that quotas have been starting to fall away or not be adhered to, or even completely eradicated at the co-op or processor level. They're going back to saying, hey, I can make more money raising heifers for milk, especially in a lower feed environment like the one we have today, than I can with beef longer term. Am I going to lose some of that immediate cash that I get from that bull calf that hits the ground and leaves at a day or 2 or 3? Yes. But if my vision for the future is growth, and if I am looking at longer term profitability, I'm going back to breeding more heifers. And we actually have clients that started that already almost a year ago because of what they saw coming. And so it's just a matter of how a guy wants to be postured. But does dairy have a place in the beef market? Yes, and they will going forward for sure. And to your point, I do believe because of the way that we have built the genetics across the dairy industry and the way we can create consistency in the carcass and the way that we track all of the touch points of that animal's life and can record that for the sake of telling that story of either sustainability or country of origin or what have you. There's a lot of really special opportunities here for the dairyman.
Mike, if dairy farmers want to talk about the markets or what they maybe should do, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, the easiest is to go to our website, which is really simple, www.Ever.Ag. Ever.Ag. It's our name. It's our website. You can find me and all of our staff there. We've got people scattered all over the country, and phone numbers are on the website, but the Platteville office, if you want to reach me directly, is 608-960-4771.
Mike North from Ever.Ag. We're at World Dairy Expo. I'm Brian Winnikins for WRDN.